Hi there. My name is Don Havenhill, and I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes with you discussing the fifth domain of teacher leadership, specifically as it pertains to data and assessment. Now, before we begin, I'd like to ask a question. What kind of doctor would you trust your life to? Dr. A, who prescribes without any diagnosis whatsoever. You walk in and immediately they just start prescribing information and prescribing medication and a course of treatment and surgery and you just need this, you need this, and just trust me, I know because I have been gifted with the supernatural sense of foresight, and I automatically know what you're going to need. You're just going to have to trust me. How many of us would really uh, trust our life to somebody who practice in that manner? I have a feeling most of us would prefer Dr. B, who takes the time to gather information and then develops a comprehensive treatment plan customized to you after doing blood work and after taking all sorts of different measurement and data. They then develop a plan that is customized to you. Most of us would prefer that particular type of doctor. In education today, however, aren't we guilty of being far too often the first doctor? Year after year, we're entrusted with a group of students, and we just start offering them information and learning without really knowing the full scope of where they're at, without truly taking the time to diagnose their needs. And maintaining this particular medical analogy, in education today, we're far too guilty of performing autopsies rather than diagnosing. Generally speaking, we wait until a grading period is over. We then offer a large test. We get data and we find ourselves going, yep, the patient is dead. And at that point, there's nothing we can do to bring about healing or restoration or redeeming their health. It's too late. And what I propose and what teacher leadership proposes is that we approach our data collection and our assessment as though we were wanting to diagnose our patients on a more regular and frequent basis, not just for the sake of gathering information, but so that we can actually make a prescription that will bring about lasting health for our patient or for our students. It's been often said that our students are over-tested and yet under-assessed. We operate in an era where pressure to perform on high-stakes exams has never been higher. We collect more data than ever, but how often do we ever do anything useful with that data? In fact, it's been described, education and educators have been described through what's known as the rearview mirror parable. The rearview mirror parable says that you spend all your time driving by looking only in the rearview mirror, how things in the past have operated. And when you think about it, that's just a really silly way to drive, where you make all your decisions while your foot's on the accelerator and your car is in gear. You're moving forward, but you're glued to your rear view mirror and you're only making judgments based on past performance. And it doesn't seem to be a very reasonable approach, and yet that tends to be where many schools are. There's got to be a better way. And fortunately, there is. And this is where data and assessment comes into play in terms of one of the domains for teacher leadership. The teacher leader is knowledgeable about current research on classroom and school-based data and design, and the design and selection of formative and summative assessment methods. The teacher leader shares this knowledge and collaborates with colleagues to use assessment and other data to make informed decisions that improve learning for all students and to inform school and district improvement strategies. Essentially, teacher leaders help to create and facilitate a culture that intentionally collects and reflects upon data to drive instruction. This is the heart of the PLC, or the professional learning community structure. Now, one popular process to operate within the PLC structure is the data teams cycle. There are 4 questions that should drive virtually every conversation you have when you're with your team. Now, these 4 questions come straight from DeFore. The first one is, what are students supposed to know and be able to do? Then, after you have decided upon that, you then ask, how do we know when our students have learned the material? Question 3, how do we respond when our students haven't learned? And then question 4 is, how do we respond when students already know the content? These 4 questions and various derivatives of them should drive every conversation you have with your team. Now, what I'm going to propose right now is the data teams process. First and foremost, you have to have data upon which to start making some decisions, and that data is often administered or collected through a pretest. Now, you and your team establish your base of student knowledge. What do you want your students to know? And this needs to be done before the unit starts. You've already written in advance your common formative assessment. The end of the assessment is already written. This is what you want your students to know and to be able to do. Now, this pretest, it could be that common formative assessment, or you could simply decide to do prerequisite skills. Who knows? But there's a lot of flexibility here. The whole point is you need to collect data so you have an idea of where you're going. You need to do a diagnosis. You then meet with your data team. Here you look for areas of need based on that data. You look for areas of celebration. And then you collaborate on which strategies can be used to meet these needs. Now, speaking anecdotally in my own experience, this is a fascinating step because far too often teachers make the assumption that the students being entrusted to them are empty vessels that are devoid of any prior knowledge. And wow, you can really save yourself a lot of time by identifying what your students know, and rather than just approaching it as a blanket and everybody gets the same training. Wow, it is so powerful. When you can identify the kids that already know the material, you can empower them to do something more enriching or deeper, and then you can focus on just the kids who need the information. But you can't really have that kind of a differentiation without having data ahead of time. Now, from here, after you have met with your team and you've identified the kids who already get it, what are you going to do for them? And for the kids that are close to getting, what are you going to do for them? And the kids that are way far from proficient, what are you going to do to them to bring them to proficiency? After you've had those conversations and then you've planned out the whole unit of instruction by sharing best practices, you then go into the instructional phase. You're constantly instructing and monitoring, and you're getting feedback throughout the whole entire process to get an idea, is this thing working? You're using your strategies, you're monitoring your students during this instruction, and then you provide a summative assessment. You collect more data to determine students' knowledge and possible strategy effectiveness. But it doesn't just end here. This happens to be where many schools and many teams are great at having a test, and then after the data is collected, you move on. Okay, well, kids didn't do too well. We're performing an autopsy. We can find out the kids that didn't make it, but we have way too many things to cover and not enough time to cover it. Let's just move on. What a disservice to our students. What we need to be able to do is meet with our team after we have collected data, and we ask ourselves, did our strategies work? Are there areas that worked well that we can celebrate and mark as perhaps an effective strategy for the future? Did we miss the mark somewhere? How effective really was our teaching, and what evidence do we have of that? Did somebody in our team get better results? How did they teach it? How can we reteach it? And it's important that after we have this conversation, we actually build into our time period the ability to go back and intervene and do some reteaching. We need to have some time built into our unit where we can go through and we can intervene on behalf of those students who for some reason didn't make it. How can we bring them up to success? And what's really powerful about this data team cycle is we can really save ourselves a lot of time by not teaching things that we assume kids don't know that they really might know. And so it will actually free us up to be able to to get to this intervention component, which is so often neglected and left out because we just don't have the time for it. Now, during the intervention piece, data should target the areas of need and the students who need the extra assistance. In my own experience, again, speaking anecdotally, my Algebra 1 team, we created an assessment in the very beginning of the year, and we use it to identify the students who are most at risk, and we put the lowest 20 students in a support class to give them the support that they would need all year long. And what was really fascinating was there was a common denominator in all of these students, and then specifically the problems they missed. They really lacked the ability to do some basic subtraction and to be able to recognize the subtraction skill and how to perform it. And how powerful would it be if we knew that ahead of time? We could have focused on that particular skill, and then perhaps we could have used a different barometer for student achievement. I mean, when you have data that is truly informative and it drives what you do, it can be very, very powerful. Now, I'd like to provide another visual for this data team process in a linear format. Now, I mentioned the very first thing that we need to do is create a pre-assessment. We need to ask ourselves, what do we want our kids to know? And then we administer that test. We collect some data. At this point, no teaching has taken place yet. None. We meet with our team. We analyze this data. We ask ourselves, what is it that our kids know? And what are we going to do for those kids who already know the material? What are we going to do for the kids who are almost there? What are we going to do for the kids who are really, really behind? And we develop specific strategies for each one of those groups of kids so that we can move them forward to success. We teach and assess, and during this time we are differentiating and we're monitoring our progress. Now, this step right here is of vital importance. We meet as a data team to then create a pre-assessment for the next unit. Now you might be saying, what? We're not even done with the current unit. What are we're going to do a pre-test right in the middle of it? Isn't that going to be a waste of time? I mean, aren't our kids really, what are they going to really know? Come on now. This seems absurd, but it's absolutely necessary. Again, you have to operate under the paradigm that our kids are not empty vessels, and they do come with us with a lot of background information, especially if they've taken the course before. And so many of our kids do have prior background knowledge. And what a disservice if we just lump kids who are already proficient together with students who are not, and we just blindly start teaching them as though everyone's at the same level. What a disservice and what a shame. How amazing would it be if we were to take those kids who are already proficient and then we challenged them, we differentiated and gave them something that would really enrich them and empower them to do that, and then we can unleash them to be able to really grow. And we focus on the kids who really needed some help, and we using the data we've collected, we identify their actual areas of need. What is it that they need help with? This is a very, very intentional approach to teaching. Now, we administer the pre-assessment for B while we're teaching A, and having done this now for a little while, I can tell you that it actually works, and the kids appreciate it. When you tell the kids, look, I don't want to teach you anything that you already know really well. And if you don't know it, don't guess. Just if you want to leave it blank, that's fine. And it's not going to count against your grade. Here's an exam, and it's just so that I, as your teacher, can make some very informed decisions about where to go next in our upcoming unit. The kids appreciate it. Now, the data team meets again to discuss the process, to analyze the two different things here. The data you've been collecting throughout the whole entire Unit A, and then to start making some choices about Unit B. You start then identifying the strategies you're going to employ, and so on and so forth. You've already identified what you want kids to know in Unit B, but now you start planning out based on the data that you've collected here in this pre-assessment. You start planning out the upcoming unit. I know we're not even done with A yet, but notice we've already started planning out Unit B. You administer the post-assessment for Unit A, and then there's a period of time for intervention. You then, for those kids who didn't make it, what are you going to do to help bring them up to proficiency? This is done before you start Unit B. Then, once you've done this component and you want to reassess, you can do that. You then move on into Unit B, and then the whole cycle continues. You begin the beginning of Unit B instruction. So, data and assessment, and in what are teacher leaders expected to be able to do? Teacher leaders increase the capacity of colleagues to identify and use multiple assessment tools aligned to state and local standards. Teacher leaders collaborate with colleagues in the design and implementation, scoring, and interpretation of student data to improve educational practice and student learning. Teacher leaders are expected to create a climate of trust and critical reflection in order to engage colleagues in challenging conversations about student learning data that leads to solutions to identified issues. Teacher leaders work with colleagues to use assessment and data findings to promote changes in instructional or organizational structures to improve student learning. Teacher leaders are what drive this healthy approach to data and assessment. A lot of responsibility falls on the shoulder of teacher leaders, but it's worth it. And our kids are worth it. And the results, I guarantee you, are worth it. So I'll leave you with this last analogy. Let's drive into the future by looking ahead, by being proactive and intentional and seeking to understand the causes for student performance. Let's look forward, not by focusing on our rear view mirror. Thank you for your time.